that this school was built. And it was the only school anywhere around for 97 years. And the boys and girls who came here lived on the plantations. And a plantation in those days was a great big farm. And there was a big farm over here, and a big farm over here, and 2 or 3 over here. And the children had to walk. Or, in bad weather, perhaps they got a ride. And the story of Maple Shade tells us that there was one man by the name of Stiles who would get out his horse and sleigh in the wintertime when there was snow and pick up all the children that were coming to school so they wouldn't have to walk. But everybody had to walk and they had to bring their lunch. And every grade was in this one room with just one teacher. So that means that maybe we had 2 people who were just learning to read. And then we might have some other people who were learning to do arithmetic. And over here might be some big people who were doing very hard reading and arithmetic. But the thing that they learned, and this is different from your school, they learn to read, to write, to spell, and do arithmetic, or mathematics, maybe.
When you were talking about all the farms, well, now it's all houses, but back then it was all farmland.
That's right. That's right. There are a great many houses here in Maple Shade now. In fact, there are so many houses that when this little school wasn't big enough, a 2-room school was built up on Poplar Avenue, the one that they've just torn part of it down. They built 2 rooms, and within just a few years, so many people had moved to Maple Shade that they had to build 2 more rooms. And then you know how many schools we have in Maple Shade now. Park Landing, your school, we have the Steinhauer School, the high school, as well as a place to take care of boys and girls. Now, what did you?
Well, my dad was on dinner time. He said we said he knew everyone in Maple Shade. Actually, he did, because there was about 503 people in that school. To turn out, there was about a lot of people in one class.
That's right. Well, we have made sort of a little museum of the school now. And we've collected a lot of things in here that people used on their plantations and in their on their farms, in their houses. And all of these things that we have were used before we had electricity. Can you think of some things in your house today that use electricity? Yes. The TV, your washer and dryer. Yes. Yes, the radio. I don't hear you.
The light bulb.
Oh yes, light. Just think how we just walk in the house and flip a switch and we have light. It's just as easy as that. Yes.
Tools.
Yes, electric tools that our father uses in his workshop. Yes.
Stove. Stove.
Of course, an electric stove. Well, let's look around and see what we have in here that people used before they had electricity. After candles, they found that they could use oil to burn. And so these are oil lamps. You put kerosene in the bottom, and then this has a wick. And you can take the globe off, light the wick, and if you wanted just a little dim light in your bedroom, you turn the wick down. But if you want a nice bright light, you turn the wick up after you get light. so these are oil lamps. And there were also bigger ones, and sometimes you had one that hung from the ceiling to make a big light in your living room or something like that. But this is what was used for light. Yes?
The one has two of them.
She does.
Yeah, well,
Mm-hmm.
but why don't these trees when our lights were out?
Of course, you have these on hand when the electricity goes off.
I am on souvenirs so that he's the bottom, so souvenirs at the bottom.
Well, that's pressed pattern glass.
My mom just likes the bottom.
Uh-huh. Well, a lot of people collect these fancy ones, and a lot of the patterns have names, too. All right. Somebody mentioned that your washer and dryer is run by electricity. How about this? What is that? Oh, when you hand wash, it's a washboard. Yes, this one's made of glass. Sometimes they were made of metal. Here's a little ridge to hold your soap. And so you had to have a tub. And you filled it with water and you washed, and then you had another tub to rinse. Yes?
When my grandma didn't go to the laundromat, she didn't spend money, so she used hers.
Of course. Yes, it saves money to do this. And somebody else spoke of tools that are not run by electricity. You know an electric head shear, don't you?
Yes.
Well, this is a hand head shear, you see. So electricity really saves us a lot of money. There was one thing that no one mentioned. What do you suppose these were used for before Mother had electricity? What?
Like a rugby.
Right, right. In the springtime, Mother took all the furniture out of the room, took up the rug, and hung it on a line in the backyard, and then she got you to take this out and beat all the dust out, because she didn't have a vacuum cleaner, you see, to take up the dust. So these are rug heaters. So no one else mentioned something that feels awfully good in the wintertime, or maybe when you have a tummy ache. And nobody suppose this is. This is the heating pad. You have an electric heating pad at your house?
Yeah.
Or a hot water bottle?
Yeah.
Well, this is a soapstone. You put this in the oven of your stove or near the fireplace in your kitchen, and it gets real nice and warm. And it stays warm for a long time. Well, mostly people used it in the bottom of their wagon or their sleigh in the wintertime when they went out to keep their feet warm. And in those days, churches didn't have any heat, so they always warmed a soapstone to take to church with them to keep their feet warm. Yes?
So, like, is that actually that thing where there's that iron?
Uh-huh. Nobody mentioned that either, did they? Maybe we didn't take time enough. But, you see, you had a coal stove, or maybe you burned wood. But this is coal. And you put that in the stove and light it, and it burns for a long time and gives very nice heat. Or you could use wood in the stove. And the stove gets nice and warm on the top. And so when after Mother washed her clothes and hung them out on the line to dry, she would have to iron them because, well, we didn't have permanent press in those days either. So she would have an iron like this, or even one a little different. And she would have 3 or 4 of these. And you see, the handle comes off. You have 3 or 4 of these sitting on your warm stove. And then as you iron and the iron cools, then you take the one you've been using and go and get another one. Of course, here's a little iron stain. Yes.
There's two of them. There's different kinds.
One with an all-metal handle. Then you always have to use a holder on it when it gets hot. Well, you mentioned that we need electricity for light, but at night, because there weren't any street lights, you took a lantern to light your way. There weren't any sidewalks either, so you had to watch out for puddles. And so you took a lantern along with you to light your way when you went out at night. And sometimes if you went out in your wagon, you hung the lantern under the wagon so that other people could see the wagon coming along. Yes.
My grandma, when she used to live on the farm, she used to have
Of course. Where did she live on a farm? Do you know? And sometimes one with a red globe like this was used on the railroad. The brakeman would get out and by swinging his lantern, he could signal to the engineer what should be done. I wonder what this is. What do you think it is?
You can pick ice up with it.
That's right. You certainly can. You see, our refrigerators are run by electricity, aren't they? But before there was electricity, you had a big box in your kitchen or outside the kitchen where you had big cakes of ice. And the iceman came every day in the summertime and twice a week in the winter. But even before that, when there were the early plantations, the big farms had an ice house. And that was made by digging a hole in the ground. And then when winter came, they would go down to the creek and cut big blocks of ice out and put it in this hole and pack sawdust around it. And then they had ice, a way to cool their food all summer long. Then, first, what did we use in school? You saw here. Well, here's something else that we could mention. What do you suppose these were used for, that Mother uses now? Yes. What does your mother have that's very helpful to her in her cooking? Cooking utensils. But what about something to do with this bit? Does she have an electric mixer? Well, this was the electric mixer. You put something in a bowl and you stirred it up. And here was another kind. And here was, thank you. There was another kind. What was this used for? What?
Eating potatoes?
Right, that's a potato masher. Exactly. But look, these things are all made of what? Wood. That means that you didn't go to the store and buy them. Father sat by the fireplace in the evening and took a piece of wood and carved a spoon for Mother to use. And this, of course, you know, don't you? So we have a pie. We didn't have this. What?
It's rolling.
It is indeed. Then we have things that boys and girls used in school.
My mom has only one at Foods.
Oh, yes. Yes. What's it called?
Slate.
Yes. And you can write on the slate, for instance, if you were having your spelling lesson and the teacher said many and they, much, put your spelling lesson on the slate. And maybe if you were in third grade and these were your words, somebody over who was a bigger boy or girl would come and check it for you because the teacher would be working with somebody else. And then when you found that you had spelled them all correctly, you would have a little pad, which I don't have, and you just erase it. All gone. And then you could do your arithmetic lesson on it too, that the teacher had put on the board. So this was a very handy little thing. And this was an early reader. No pictures, just black and white. And some of the funniest things in here that you had to learn to read. A cat is in my hat. A rat is in my hat. A bat is in my hat. And down here, my cat is on the mat. You see, they were working in 80s, I think. But not at all interesting like your reading books today. Very different. And then somebody mentioned the tools. This is a plane. This is an apple peeler. You put the apple on these little spikes, and then you turn this somehow, and by turning it around, it took the peel off the apple. I don't think it was very efficient. And this was a cherry stoner. You put the cherries in here and turn the little handle, and the cherries came out one side and stones came out the other. So you see, they did try to make things easy for themselves as time went along. And you know what this is, don't you? That's a meat grinder. We have one other thing that over here that was a labor-saving device. It's nice to be able to sit down and do your work. So could I borrow you? And you show us how this works? You have to sit on it because it's called a shaving horse. You have to sit on it. Now, do you think that's the way? How are you going to get your foot on this if you sit that way? No. Now you got it. Over here. All the way over. Now slide up so your foot will touch this. See this piece of wood? Yeah. What's going to happen to it if you push on that pedal?
I don't know.
Push on it. What's going to happen to it? Does it hold it fast?
Yeah.
So that you could take a tool back here. See, if you held that fast with your foot, you could take a tool like this and shave it, and you could make shingles, or if you had a piece like this and you took the corners off, you could make the leg of a chair or a table, and you could sit down doing it. Does that seem easy? Okay, thank you. Now, do you have questions? We have something very interesting here. A long, long, long time ago, there was a cemetery in Maple Shade, up back of the Deerfield Apartments. And these are some, that is just what is left of the tombstones. Over here, how you knew when school was time to come to school. Yeah, I think and you had to have a button hook to undo all those funny little buttons. And this belonged to some little boy who came Who'd like to try that? Oh, of course you would. Come on up. Yeah.
Oh.
There you are. Come on. That's it. And this was for a little girl. If this is made of real soft cloth, she probably wore this in the summer. And you see what a great big bonnet it has to keep the sun off her face because she was fussy about her complexion. And in the winter, it kept the wind off. They were very handy in cold weather and in warm weather. Yes.
They had like kind of ABC boards with their ABCs on.
Yes. Something like this. You take it and show it to the boys and girls. That's how little people learn their ABCs. Yes.
The older people, like say if you were in second or third grade, you can have the prayers on. Did you have pencils like today?
Well, they started out with the slate pencils. And then, I suppose later on there were lead pencils. But we have, how many of you write with a ball pen? Well, it wasn't always that way. You had something like this that had a little metal pen. And first you had, the feather thing. I'll show you that. Now we have them. This was the first pen. People made their own ink from berry juice and roots. And this is a goose feather. Father had to take a sharp knife and fashion this, make a little split in it. And that's what people wrote with in George Washington's time. Then later on, they made pen holders. You see the little pen does come out. And you could put, when this one became used, then you could put a new one in. And nowadays we have ballpoint pens, which are very different. And this is what some of the boys and girls had to carry their things in. It's a school companion. See, you put all sorts of things in there. Yes?
What's that glass thing right there? Something like that. Should we get one pipe or something?
What have you in mind? Oh. Well, what does it look like to you?
Now that I'm closer to it, it's an old-fashioned glitter.
It certainly is. And it was, that came from an old house up on North Fork Landing Road. And so did this one. Here's a wooden one, and here's another glass one. Anybody else? Yes.
There's like a gum case in there.
Yes.
Right there. What did you use the gum case?
I guess people had guns for the same reason they have guns these days. This one's rather an elaborate one. You see, it had its own case, has an ivory handle, and here's the place you kept the bullets.
Is that $1,000 bill or something?
I guess it is. Yes. Say what? Oh, the hat. Well, have you seen pictures of anyone wearing a hat like that? Oh, you're thinking of the one with the name on it? The dunce cap. And you say bad kids wore those. Oh, they did. And somebody wore a dunce cap.
Yeah, he threw a big airplane.
Yes. I didn't hear you. Oh, well, then I guess you put them in the corner. That's pretty bad. They have to be put in the corner. Or even they have to sit on a chair all by themselves. Any other questions? Well, if you look on the back wall, you see a maple shade quilt that the ladies of the Women's Club made, and all of the things that we think of when we think about maple shade. Is the church and the municipal building, and the trolley car and the little red schoolhouse. And then over by the gentleman who's taking our pictures, you see two other quilts. Nowadays, when you want a new blanket for your bed, you simply go to the store and buy it. But in those days, people had to make their own blankets. They had sheep on their plantations, and they would shear the sheep and wash the wool and spin it, make their own blankets or quilts. Those are two quilts up there. Yes. What do they have for money? Money like we have. Yes.
If they were to, they would take, sheepskin, and then they would spin it, and then they would, if they wanted red, they would take blueberries or purple, and they would smash them.
And they knew how to make dye from berries and roots and things like that. Well, after slates, I suppose there was some very coarse paper. It would be paper made of wood, like the same as our paper is made. Only it might not have been as smooth and nice as we have. Yes.
Well, now we have machines, because machines have like those round things with blood and designs, and they put metal under it. When the machine goes down, they make a hole. You see marks in them. The machine does it a triple time to make sure it's like round. Because I went to a factory.
Well, when you stop and think about machinery, you have to think about electricity, don't you? And even our clock up there, you see. Most of our clocks at home are electric clocks. But that one has two places up there on its face where you would have to have a key to wind it to make it go.
Thank you very much. Ms. Cutler, boys and girls, I hope that you learned a lot today, and we'll see Mrs. Cutler.
I'm always glad to have you come.
Boys and girls, the Little Red Schoolhouse does have open house once a month. Maybe if you're by yourself with your parents, you can with your parents, then you could just look around everything you see in the cases.
You must have 27 or 28. 28. That's a nice size class. And this is third grade. Good. Oh, I know that. Oh, that's the biggest class in the elementary school. Oh, that's great. school where you attend now, isn't it? Begins with a different flag. And when you get inside of this classroom, it's very different from the one you know about. Well, the little school was built back in 1810. That's more than 170 years ago. And it was the only school in the area for 97 years. There weren't very many boys and girls came when it was first built, because Maple Shade was just a lot of big plantations or farms, and the boys and girls from those farms came. And they didn't come all year like you did. They came for just a few months in the winter time, because boys and girls had to help on the farm. In the springtime there was planting, and in the fall there was harvest. And so boys and girls had to do their share on the farms in days long gone by. And it's only now that we have 180 days of school. So, and things were very different in here too. Had just one teacher, but we had all grades, first, second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh, eighth grades. All the boys and girls in the area came to this school, and the teacher did his or her best to help everyone. What did they learn? Well, in your school you have physical training, physical education, and art, and music, and science. But in days gone by, where there was just one teacher, the boys and girls were taught to read, to write, to spell, and do arithmetic or do numbers. Those were the things that were important. So they were the things that they were taught. So it was very different. Even these desks you see are quite different from what those boys and girls had. They probably had a place for two people to sit and just a bench, not anywhere near as comfortable as these are. And in your school you probably have separate chairs and desks so that you can move them about and group them and that sort of thing. Well, we like to think that this little school is now a museum where we have things that people used on those plantations in days gone by. And the things that we have are all things that were used before we had electricity in our homes. Tell me some things in your house that use electricity. Yes. The lamp? Yes. You just walk in the door and turn on the switch and you have light, don't you? That's electricity. What else?
TV.
Yes.
Stove.
Your electric stove? Yes. Yes. Yes.
Microwave oven.
Yes, indeed. Oh, that's very new, isn't it? Yes.
Heater.
A heater in the basement, or you have an electric heater. Even if you have an oil or a gas furnace you have electric switch on it, don't you? It doesn't work if the current goes off. That's right. Yes. Yes. Oh my. Yes.
Vacuum cleaner.
Oh, indeed. Very important.
Electric saw.
Any kind of an electric tool.
Yeah.
An electric saw, an electric drill. Yes. Well, we've named quite a few things, haven't we? I think there's one thing that we haven't thought of that you doesn't depend on, and I think maybe you go there when you go home from school.
Oh.
What?
Refrigerator.
Well, let's see what we have that takes the place of the things that we now depend on electricity for. This takes the place of turning on the switch. These are oil lamps. After candles, people found that they could use kerosene or some other sort of oil earlier in a lamp like this. And it has a wick. and take this off. Take a match or an ember from the fireplace or stove and light this wick. And if you want a dim light, you turn the wick way down. If you want a nice bright light, turn the wick up. And every Saturday, somebody had to go all over the house and gather these globes and wash them. That was a job for somebody. And then, oh, how about when your mother cooks? What does she use? Oh, yes. Yes, but there was something I was thinking of specifically that's run by electricity. Huh? Yes.
A beer?
But what makes a beater? Yes, but what do you call it? Don't you call it an electric mixer?
Yeah.
Does she have something with a handle on that she can do all sorts of things with? Well, look. Mothers in those days. Mothers in those days didn't have electric mixers or beaters. And so they had to do this and this and this with all sorts of things. Where did they get these? Well, there wasn't any 5 and 10. Wasn't any Jefferson Ward. So where do you think these came from? They certainly did. They had to take a piece of wood and sit down and just whittle it out to make whatever they needed. That was a splendid idea. And what about this? How was this used? Yeah.
Like a meat smasher?
Could be. Could be used in making butter, yes. You have to get the rest of the buttermilk out of it, yes. Of course. Mashed potatoes. And you could also make applesauce. You could strain the pumpkin for your Thanksgiving pie. You could do all sorts of things with this. And naturally, you know what this is. What is it? It's a baker roller or a rolling pin, we call it. Yeah. So they had all sorts of things to help them in their cooking. Nothing like we have today that's run by electricity. Then over here, somebody mentioned what this would take the place of. What?
A beer.
For what?
Eggs.
You have to have a lot of eggs. What do you think?
For rugs.
For rugs, of course. This is a carpet beater. You see, Mother didn't have a vacuum cleaner to take up that dust that gets in the carpet. So every springtime, she would have spring house cleaning. And she'd move all the furniture out of the room, take up the rug, take it out and hang it over a line in the backyard, and then she would send you there to beat it. Get all the dust out, and then you have to bring it in and put it down and bring all the furniture back. Same thing.
Why is it bigger for?
Well, just two different ideas of how to go about the same job. Somebody mentioned what this would take the place of. What?
A weed cutter?
A weed cutter. Yes, you could cut weeds with it, but I think there was another reason first that came. What?
Chop meat?
Have to be a huge piece of meat. What do you think?
Pruning bushes?
Right, or a hedge clipper. Nowadays, we have an electric hedge trimmer, don't we? That you can do all sorts of things. But here's this one that you have to work by hand. I think we know what this is, yes.
A washing machine? A washer? To wash clothes with?
What do you call it? Yes,
A washboard?
a washboard.
Thinking of
You had to have a tub of water, And you put this in the tub, and here's a ledge to hold the soap, and here this is glass, but the first ones were either wood or metal. So this was what Mother did. Wash, 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 wash. Rinse, 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 and take them out and hang them on the line. Nowadays, we just stick them in the washer, pull them out of the washer, and put them in the dryer, and we're all done. I bet you don't know what this is.
Oh!
What do you think it is?
Something to write on?
No.
Ooh, I know.
You think you know? Come on.
A chalkboard.
Oh, it's awfully heavy. Feel it. Don't drop. You got it?
Yeah.
That is a piece of soapstone. And it has a handle on it like this so you can carry it about. You put it in your oven, your stove oven, or by the fireplace and get it real warm. In very cold nights, you could put it down in the bottom of your bed. Or if you were going out in your wagon or your sleigh, you could put it in the bottom and keep your feet warm. And in days gone by, there wasn't any heat in any of the churches. So they always heated a soapstone in the winter to keep their feet warm in church.
Where did you find the soapstone?
I don't know where this came from. Somebody must have had it and given it to us. Yes?
Did they use it in the school?
Beg pardon?
Did they use it in the school?
No, the school, you see, had a stove, something like this. But it wasn't in the corner the way this one is. It was right in the middle of the room.
Wow.
So that everybody got heat. You see, if the stove were over here, the folks over in that corner would be kind of cool. But if they had the stove in the middle, everybody would get heat. But you know, they had a little fence around it so the children wouldn't stumble and fall against it. So this was how folks kept warm. They had stoves. And when they had the stove, they burned coal. That comes from a mine, you know, up in Pennsylvania. You put it in the stove and it burns nice and hot. Sometimes you could use wood. And then after your mother had washed the clothes and hung them on the line, brought them in, she had to iron them because we didn't have permanent press in those days. And so this was an iron. The top of the stove is warm, and you have 3 or 4 of these. The handle comes off. So when you iron with a warm iron, and when it cools off, you take it back and put it on the stove, and pick up another warm one and use it. We talked about light in the house. What about light out of doors? There weren't any street lights. So, what? It's a lantern, and yes.
They used it up in like caves and stuff.
Yes, but what about when there were no street lights? Yes.
How did they make those?
How did they make them? Well, there must have been some way because here it is. They manufactured them somehow. This isn't a real old one, you see. Yes. Yes, if you went out at night in your wagon instead of in your automobile, you just turn on the headlights. You had to have a light to show where you were going down the road. And so they hung the lantern under the wagon for other people to see. And then too, if you had to go to church in the evening or a meeting in the evening, you took the lantern along with you to light your way, so that if we're a puddle or something like that, you wouldn't step in it. You had a light to show you the way. Over there, what is it? Good. You could. But that was another
toys with it.
Yes. In days gone by, probably when this school was first started, there weren't any refrigerators. But people who lived on the plantations had ice houses. Now, an ice house was made or built by digging a deep hole and then building a house over it. In the wintertime, when the south or the north branch of the Pennsauken froze over, they would take sleds and go down to the creek and cut out blocks of ice, bring them up, put them down in that hole in the ice house, cover it over with sawdust, and it would stay there a long, long time. It would stay there all summer so that they could keep their milk and their butter and their meat cool, even in the summertime. Nowadays, we just stick things in the refrigerator and know that they're going to stay fresh. But this, and then after the Iceman began to come around in his wagon, he had this. And you had a big box in your kitchen or in a shed, and he would bring you a 50-pound piece of ice or a 100-pound piece of ice, depending on how big your box was. And that, but he had to come, you see. In the summer, he came around every day. And in the winter, he came around twice a week because of that ice lasting longer. Well, what about when we went to school? Yes, this is a blackboard. This is a blackboard. This had another different name. It's the same thing.
We just studied about the kind of rock that was. Everybody's
Yes. It's a slate. A slate. And one of the girls in the other class said that her mother had a double one. So, well, when the teacher came over here to third grade and gave a spelling lesson, well, you could write your spelling words on here. If she said many, or they, or book. So you could write them right on there. And then when you had all of the words, perhaps someone, a bigger boy or girl over here would come and see whether it was right or not. And then when you're finished, you'd have a little pad, not my fingers. You'd have a little pad. And you could erase what you had done and then do your arithmetic. Very easy and very handy, yes. They could, I guess. Maybe the teacher would put it on the board and make a copy on their slate, take it home, do the answers, and bring it back. It's a good idea. You know what? The reading books weren't that great. You think of the lovely reading books you have now in your class. And they certainly don't look like this. They probably have colored pictures. This one just has a black and white picture. And I think this must be one of the first readers because over here you're going to learn some words. Lad, ad, had, sad, bad. Bed, ed, fed, led, read. And then when you've learned those words, you can read down here. Ned had a kid. Ned fed his kid, and so forth. Not very interesting, is it? And this is a McGuffey's first reader, which was a very famous one that was used in school. You see, this is a little bit better than that one.
Certainly doesn't compare to Julie and the Short Sweep, does it?
There are other things that people thought of to save themselves work. This you see clamps on a table. I'll turn them. to guess what it
I
does.
know.
What does it do? What do you think it does?
Peels apples.
It does, yes. See it? Well, come on, now let's work. You put the apple on these spikes, and then with a blade, you turn it, takes the peel off the apple. I don't think it's very efficient. A cherry stone. Put the cherries in here, turn the handle. Cherries come out one side, stones come out the other. And this you know.
Yeah. Did I It's a penny grinder. Penny grinder.
The books were different. The things they wrote with were different. The very beginners had a little thing like this that just had the alphabet on. They had to learn the alphabet on their little hand holders. And then the very first people wrote with a pen like this. It's a goose quill. Father had to take a sharp knife. And then later on, we learned to make ink that you could use with a sharp pen like this. And you see, you could take the old pen out and put in a fresh one when that one got a little rusty. And so, we had these, and now what do you use? What kind of a pen? Not this kind.
The pen, it's just a long and it has the one just like
What do they call it? What kind of a pen? Yes.
ballpoint.
A ballpoint pen, yes. That's what we use now. And, well, we have some old-fashioned clothing here. You had to get up extra early in the morning if you wore shoes like that, because all those little buttons had to be pulled together with a button hook. And this was a hat that some little fellow wore to school. Would you like to try it on? You would? All right, stand up and put it on. Let them see it on the TV. There you go. And this is what a little girl wore. Come on. See, it has this was a summer garment. It's made of calico. And it has a ruffle to keep the sun off your neck. And it has a great big wide hood to keep the sun off your face. Then in the winter they were made of wool. And that kept the wind and the cold from you. So you put it on, turn it on so they can see on TV. Put it on.
TV.
And the rest of this was up there, I can see it. And then how do you know when it was time to come to school? You have electric bells in your school? Is that the one time? But to see that when the teacher was ready for the boys and girls to come in, she went out and rang.
No wonder she can see that when you can hear all the
You can indeed, yes. It probably did. There is a little bell tree up there. That bell that's up there is not the bell that was used. But there probably was a bell like that up there that could be used too. Any other questions? Boys and girls, when they had pencils and pens and erasers, had a school companion. You see there's a place for pencils, a place for eraser, and even something down there called a school companion. Oh, we could call your attention to the quilts. Because in days gone by, the plantation owners kept sheep. And they would shear the sheep in the springtime, wash and comb the wool, spin it, make their own blankets or their own stuffing for quilts. Now that one over there was made by the ladies of the Make-A-Shape Women's Club. It's a Make-A-Shape quilt. Has all the interesting places in Make-A-Shape, plus the make-believe. And then one back to the gentleman taking the pictures are two quilts. One has a very distinct pattern. It's called the log cabin pattern. And the one with all of the bright red is a crazy quilt. Because it doesn't have any pattern. They just took all different shaped pieces and put them together, and that made a crazy quilt. Now, when you think of anything else,
Maybe they have some questions.
love to have your question. Something I haven't mentioned? Yes. Well, they used the slates, and then when paper became available, they probably used paper. Might be different from the paper we had. It might not be as smooth and nice.
When they were there, what did you use for the
Well, over there on the shelf, there is a dunce cap. Do you see it?
punishment?
So if somebody did something that it wasn't quite the thing to do in a classroom, the teacher could ask that person to put that dunce cap on. Because dunce means, silly person. And if you have a dunce cap on, it means you've done something a little silly. Just one teacher. One teacher. And sometimes it was a man, sometimes it was a lady.
Did they have typewriters? No. Because my friend has a typewriter. It's really, really old.
Well, this one's rather old, but I'm sure that it was made before the school, after the school was closed. Yes. Oh, what would you tell you about that? This is a labor-saving device. That means something that makes work easier to do. People had to, when they were building their own houses, making their own furniture, they had to make shingles. See, this is a shingle from an old house here in Make-A-Shape. It probably is cedar. And so the person would take, the man would take slabs of cedar, and by using this shaving horse, could make shingles, but he could do it while he was sitting down. We need to have someone to show us how this works, okay? You sit on it like you sit on a horse. So you see, you're sitting down to do your work. Then you have it. Suppose you wanted to make a leg for a chair. You would take a piece of wood, something like this, and you would fasten it under here. Children are having to have a different piece of wood. Suppose then we're going to make a shingle, only this would be a wider piece. You put it under here, and you push on that pedal down there at the bottom. Push on it real hard. What does that do?
It holds it still.
It certainly does. Holds it right in place so that you could take a draw knife and smooth it and make whatever you want to make. You can sit down doing it. That's why we call it a labor-saving device. These are just a lot of other tools that were used in a carpenter shop or a shop where they made wagons for the farmers.
How did they train their cats and dogs?
How did they train them? I think they put them out at night. You know, when people live on farms, they let their cats sleep in the barn. Yes. Yes? Oh, well, yes. We didn't talk about this. In the springtime, after the farmers had planted their corn, and because they kept sheep and cows and horses and sometimes oxen, they had to raise a lot of corn, a lot of wheat, a lot of oats to feed those animals. So when they planted the corn in the springtime and then had to harrow it to keep the weeds down, the horse just dearly loved to nibble on that nice fresh green corn that was growing. So what did they do with this? What? Put it over the horse's nose so that he couldn't eat the corn, spoil the crop. Yes?
Are those books, have they always been there?
Well, they've been given to us by various people, and they are real old. Some of them are very old. Here's one you see. It's an arithmetic book, and it's dated back to 1874. It's
Wow.
more than 100 years old.
Now, 111 years old. 11 years old.
There are all sorts of books in here, reading books, and arithmetic books, and spelling books. A long time ago, up along the creek, on the north branch of the Pennsauken, back of the Deerfield Apartments, there was an old cemetery. It was given by a man who owned the land for all those folks who would like to use it. And so just recently, we were given the last of the tombstones from that little old cemetery. And then, almost 100 years ago, they were going to have a ceremony to commemorate that, and they were going to put this bronze plate on a big rock. Well, they never did. And the man who owned the land, Mr. Haynes, gave us this plaque. And it tells you that. But it was ours because it was ours. Anything else? Yes. What? Chalk or a big slate pencil. Yes. Originally, this was a solid door. And we had a lady here the other day who was 97 years old. And she went to this school. And she said this was where they kept their lunches, in this closet. Yes. I think probably the first teacher was a man. And then after that, there were ladies. And the picture over there on the counter is the picture of the last teacher who was here, Miss Priscilla Gardner. And she was the first teacher to go up to the other school on Poplar Avenue when that was built. And then when there were 2 rooms up there, so she was the principal, and a lady by the name of Miss Johnson. So Miss Johnson had 1st, 2nd, and 3rd grades. Miss Priscilla Gardner had fourth and fifth grades. After that, the boys and girls went to Morristown School.
When you're talking about Abraham Lincoln.
Yes.
What? What are them lockers up there for?
Just storage. That's where we keep some of our Christmas things now. Yes.
What the pictures used for that?
They had a desk, and when we asked the lady who had attended, she said it was right here. That's where the teacher had her desk. Yes.
Did you put like some stuff for that one here a long time ago?
Yes, the desks are different. Because after this was no longer a school, people lived here. This was a house. And they mended shoes, and there was a barber shop here, I think, and until the Historical Society took the little building over. Yes.
Did they have a fire door or was that the other door?
Well, there's a door here and a door here. Yes.
Back then, the day has things like encyclopedias and dictionaries to use.
I question. I'm not sure they did. There's something pretty new.
How do we go for a fire?
Well, you were in the room, and the stove was right in the middle, and that was the only place there could be a fire. And there was a little fence around the stove so that people wouldn't bump into it and get burned. See, they had the stove in the middle because then everybody got warm. Yes. Oh, those necklaces. Well, you know, we had a bicentennial in 1976. That was before your time. And people bought all sorts of interesting things to commemorate the bicentennial. And that's a collection that I made. Bicentennial? That was the 200th anniversary of the signing of our Declaration of Independence in 1776. Yes. Oh, then we call it tricentennial. Because bi means two and tri means three. Yes.
There's some pictures and families listed.
Well, this is a picture of the way the school looked when the Historical Society took it over. It was a mess. It needed all sorts of things done for it, and so we have done. We've fixed the floor, put in a new ceiling, put in lights, put in a heater, and then these are just some pictures of people who took part in making our little school what it is today. Here's our first fire engine. It was just a wagon. And the first man to bring a horse to pull the wagon if there was a fire got $2 for bringing the horse. And we can show you something else that goes along with the bicentennial. When there was a fire in Maple Shade, back in the corner where your school is, there was a huge iron hoop hung on a great frame, and fastened to it was a metal mallet, so that if there were a fire back there, somebody could run and, by swinging that mallet, send out a great sound to tell people that there was a fire. There was one up at Spruce Avenue, up by Charlie Brown's, and then there was one back on North Fork Lane Road. The one that was up at Spruce Avenue is out on our front lawn now. And during the time of our bicentennial, the oldest fireman in Maple Shade took this mallet and he struck that hoop out there 200 times for 200 years of our country. So when you go out, you might want to walk over and look at that booth. That was our first fire alarm before we had an electric siren.
Where is it?
Right up on the wall.
We'll look at it when we go out.
I know where it is.
Yes.
How did you make the pizza paint this on the back?
Well, you see, these desks were made when we had iron foundries, and they were just manufactured and brought in. Well, I don't think anyone sat here regularly. Everybody had a desk where you could put some of your things. And then when the teacher had the second grade reading class, she would have them come up and she'd sit down and read with them. That's what these front seats were used for. Little special classes. Oh, pretty classes. Yes.
What is that door?
That goes up to the wall. There's a storage space up there.
Okay, what's a wall?
Well, and the roof of the school is like this, and the walls are like this, or the ceiling is here. So up here in this triangular space, there's a storage space. You can call it the wall. There probably was a bell there long ago. That bell is not the bell that was used when the school was in use. That bell came from a fire company over in Haddonfield. Yes.
Why is the door up there?
Why?
On the ceiling.
Just
explain.
What's your question?
Why is the door up there?
This?
There.
Well, we just said that goes up to the wall where you can store things. Yes.
What was he telling me that's the school?
Oh, they were for inkwells. You had a little glass inkwell. Well, it's nice to have you here this morning. And you see, you're going to be on television. How about that? So you don't have to be, if you have cable, you don't have to be looking for yourselves. Our little school here is more than 170 years old because it was built in 1812. It's the only school anywhere around for 97 years. There weren't many boys and girls who came here until almost the last, because Maple Shade was just a lot of big farms. Sometimes they called them plantations. And maybe there would be a family living back this way and a family over here, and 2 or 3 families up this way. There weren't many children to come to school, but their parents certainly wanted them to get an education. So a man by the name of Samuel Burrow gave the land and had the school built. And that was the first school anywhere around. Now, of course, the school was very different from what you see here. The desks were different because these desks came from the Elizabeth Haig School, and that wasn't being used anymore except. And so maybe they had a table where 2 people could sit and a little bench. Nowhere near as comfortable as these or the furniture that you have in your school now. It's very different. And we had a lady here the other day, a very, very elderly lady who had come to this school. And she told us that the stove, in those days, was right in the middle of the room. Now that would be a lot more comfortable for these folks over here, wouldn't it? Because the stoves are very, really chilly. The stove was in the middle, then everybody kept warm. And it had a little fence around it to keep people from bumping into it and getting burned. It was a good idea, wasn't it? when they built the new school up on Poplar Avenue, they built 2 rooms. And within just a few years, they had to add 2 more rooms because Maple Shade was growing. It was becoming a town instead of plantations. And people lived in this building until 1956, when the Historical Society took it over. And now we've made it into a little museum. And the things we've collected in here are things that people used in their homes, in their barns, on their farms in those days gone by. Nowadays, we think of the easy way that we live, and the thing that makes it so easy is electricity. Tell me some things that make life easy in your home with electricity. Yes. A refrigerator, an electric refrigerator, indeed, that's a good suggestion. Yes. The lights that we just come in and flip on the switch, don't we? And we have light. Just so easy. An electric stove, right? Mm-hmm. Oh, come on, there are lots of other things you have in your house that are run by electricity. Yes? 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 A vacuum cleaner, very important. Mine is what keeps us nice and clean. Yes? Mm-hmm. Yes. Anything else?
The word of second.
I would think maybe electricity was pumping the water that comes out of our sink in our bathroom. I would think so. What else? Yes.
Dishwasher.
A dishwasher? Oh, and speaking of a washer,
A dryer.
oh, a clothes washer and a dryer. Yes, indeed. Well, let's see what we have that people used in place of some of those things. The first lights, of course, were candles. And then people learned that you could use oil for a light. So this is an oil lamp. This is a little bowl that holds oil, kerosene, or sometimes earlier, a different kind of oil. And it has a little wick in it. You take the globe off like this, and you light this wick. It goes down into the oil, you see. And if you want a real dim light, you turn the wick way down. Or if you want a bright light, you turn the wick up farther. And then every Saturday, somebody had to go all through the house, gather these globes, wash them, because they got a little smudged with soot from there. And this is another thing. Well, no one mentioned something that Mother must use in her kitchen a lot when she's cooking. Come on. Yes, that was mentioned. Yes, that would be part of your stove, wouldn't it? Mm-hmm. Something else that Mother uses. What? Yes.
A mixer.
A mixer. Yes. Think how many things she does with that mixer. And think how many things that before there was electricity and you had those mixers. Think how many things Mother had to do with these. Or beat this. You could do anything with this. Now, where do you suppose these came from? Wasn't any 5 and 10. Wasn't any Jefferson Ward or Kmart. Where do these come from? Where?
Trees?
Yes. Well, what do you mean when you say they came from trees? They are. But how did they get like this? I didn't just go. Of course they did. They took a piece of wood and took a sharp knife. And at night when the fire was burning, perhaps the father sat down and he would make Mother a paddle that she could use. Or maybe he would work out a spoon that could be used. And then there were other things too. What do you think this was from? mashed potatoes with this. You could also make applesauce, couldn't you? You could, if you didn't, you couldn't buy pumpkin in a can at the Acme like you can today. So you went out in the field and you got the pumpkin and you cut it down and you took the seeds out and you pared the outside off and you cooked the pumpkin and then you had to mash it to make your Thanksgiving pumpkin pie. How many of you got pumpkins for Halloween? Did you? Nice. What is it? You use it that way, but what do you call it? What do you call it? It's a scrubbing board or a washboard. Indeed it is. You had to have a tub of water. You put your clothes in and then you took them and you rubbed them. And here was a little ledge for your soap. Now this is glass. Sometimes it was metal, sometimes it was even wood. And then you had another tub in which you rinsed your clothes, and then you took them out of doors and hung them on the line. Nowadays, what do? You stick them in the washer and you turn the little dial, and after a bit, when they're done, we pull them out and put them in the dryer, don't we? Yes?
When would this have been with the glass? That would that have been a later one?
Oh, yes, probably in the late 1800s or early 1900s. Yes.
I know it has a small one that has metal in it. And when the Girl Scouts, she gave me to we've had two little daisy magnets in her backpack, and she used it for like
Yeah, a little board. Yes. What do you think?
glass spiders.
I'll bet if I swatted a fly with this one, he would get away. What do you think? What?
Beater and strainer.
Your first word. What did you call it?
Beater.
A beater. Well, what did you beat? What?
Eggs.
You have a lot of eggs in a big bowl, wouldn't you? Something very special that you beat with this.
For children.
I don't think so.
Treasure.
Yes.
Clothes. When you hang out your rug and then beat it.
That's exactly what you do. This is a rug beater. In springtime, because Mother had no vacuum, she just had a broom, and that doesn't take up the dust like a vacuum does. In the springtime, she would have spring house cleaning. She'd move all the furniture out of the room, take up the rug, take it out and hang it over the clothesline, and then she would give you this and say, you go out and beat the rug. And then she would come out and see how well you did it. Because she knew that if still dust was coming out, you'd better be a little longer, hadn't you? Then she'd bring it in, put it down on the floor, bring back all the furniture. Spring house cleaning is done. These are carpet beaters. Nobody mentioned an electric heating pad. Do you have them in your house? An electric heating pad? Put on your back when your back hurts. They feel good, don't they? Well, this is what people used before they had electric heating pads. They would put this in the oven of their stove or near the fireplace and get it real nice and warm. Then they wrap it in a piece of blanket. You could put it in the bottom of your bed on a real cold night. Or, if you were going out in your horse and wagon in the cold weather, you would put this in the bottom of your wagon to keep your feet warm. Or in your sleigh. Or, in days gone by, churches didn't have heat. So when you were going to church, you always took your soapstone to keep your feet warm in the cold weather. So this was a foot warmer. And of course, here's the kind of a stove that was in many homes. And you used coal. It comes from a mine up in Pennsylvania. Burns nice and hot. And of course, one of the things that boys and girls always had to do was take out the ashes. So you put the coal in the top of the stove, and as it burned, it made ashes, and they fell down to the bottom. They had to be cleaned up periodically. Or you could burn wood in your stove. And of course, that made the top of the stove warm. And that's how Mother went about her ironing. You see, she used this washboard and hung the things out. And when they came in, they had to be ironed. I think a lot of your things are permanent press these days, aren't they? You just kind of hang them up and then you put them in the dryer and they come out nice and smooth. Well, in those days, things had to be ironed. So this was one kind of an iron that was used. You had 3 or 4 of these, and you kept them on the top of the stove so that they would stay warm. Then as you needed to use one, you would take it and iron it until it got cool. Then you could take the handle off and get another warm one and put this one back on the stove, let it get warm again. Somebody mentioned this. What? Ice tongs. Right. We have electric refrigerators now. But in days gone by, when the school was first started, people had ice houses. And an ice house was made by digging a hole in the ground. Oh, it was maybe this far, and it would be quite deep. And then they would build a shed over the hole. And in wintertime, they would go down to the South Branch or the North Branch of the Pennsauken and cut big blocks of ice and haul them up and put them in the ice house down in this hole. And then they would spread a layer of sawdust, and then they put another layer of ice, another layer of sawdust, and another layer until they had that hole filled. And then you see they had so much ice and it was packed so close that they would have ice all summer long to keep their food cool. Well, that was very important to have an ice house with a lot of ice in it. Then, of course, later the Iceman came around with his horse and wagon. And he would bring you ice with those tongs. If you had a big ice box, he would bring you 100 pounds. If you had a small ice box, he would bring you 50 pounds. In the summer, he came every day because ice melted very quickly. In the winter, he came twice a week to bring ice for folks who needed it. Well, somebody mentioned light, and we talked about what people had in their houses. This is what they had when they went out of doors. The farmer used one of these to do his chores in the barn. Because when he got up to feed his stock in the morning, it would be dark, and he would take a lantern out to the barn and to feed his animals. At night, the same thing. You know, we just changed to daylight saving, didn't we? and it's going to get dark a lot earlier. So the farmer still had to look after his stuff, and he would take a lantern, and that was the light he had. He also would put it under his wagon if he were going to take his horse and wagon out at night. And if anyone had a meeting or was going to church at night, they would take a lantern and carry it along to show them the way, because there were no street lights that we depend on. No street lights at all. Not even a traffic light or anything yet. Well, their school books were a little different. Think of your nice reading books with the colored pictures and the pretty stories. This was a reading book. And the story isn't particularly interesting. It says, speak the truth, tell the truth. If you break a cup, go and say, I broke it. Pray forgive me. And you see, you could read it because you had studied all of these words along the side of the page. And here was another early reading book. This was a first reader, and this was really more interesting than the other one. Reading books were very different. And that's what the boys and girls did. There was just one teacher in one big room with all classes, first, second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh, eighth. Maybe she'd have one little person over here just beginning to read, somebody else who was doing better, some big boys and girls over here who were doing hard work. And so everybody had to help everybody. And the little ones who were just learning their ABCs had something like this. They could just hold their hand, and it also had the numbers on it too. And they had to learn all of those. Then when they got to the point where they could write, they had people had to make their own ink. This was a goose feather. The father would take it and with a sharp knife shape it and split it. Then it would hold the ink. Later on, there were different kinds of pens. This is called a pen holder, and the little pen comes out so that when it gets rusty or ragged, you can take it out and put in a fresh one. And this was what they carried their pencils and pens in, called a school companion. See, it has little ridges on your pencils, pencil eraser, and the bottom part. And how did you know when the school was called? That was the school bell. There was a bell up in the little cupola on the top of the school that probably was used later. The bell that's up there now is not the bell that was used. And people wore clothing that was a little different from what we are acquainted with. How about this? You had to get up extra early in the morning if you wore shoes like this, because each one of those little buttons had to be put together with a button hook. Let me put a button hook here somewhere. But that was a tedious little job. Then, some little boy wore this to school, no doubt. Who would like to try it on? All right. Come over and put it on. Turn around so everybody can see it. And this belonged to a little girl. It's made of lightweight calico because this was a summer garment. And it's made this way. It has a ruffle so the sun doesn't get on the back of your neck. And and it has this great wide front so the sun doesn't spoil your complexion. And in the winter time, it was made of wool. And then you see this kept the wind and the rain out of your face. And this went down over your coat collar and kept it out. Who wants to put it? Well, whenever there's a fire in Mapleshade, now you hear the electric siren, don't you? And there's a siren over here and one back at the Acme and one on the municipal building. But in days gone by, before electricity, you did not have an electric siren. You had a great big iron hoop. I think you went out and looked at it, didn't you?
Yes.
There were 3 of them in town. One back by your school, one up by Charlie Jones, and one back on North Fork Landing Road. And so there was a heavy mallet attached to that rim, and by striking it, it made a great gong sound. The people knew there was a fire and they needed to come running to help. Well, when our country was 200 years old, the oldest fireman in Mapleshade, a man by the name of Frederick Moore, struck out a rim out here 200 times on the 4th of July, 1976. So we're very proud of that. Do you have any questions? I see your buses here, but if you have questions, we can answer them. Yes?
What kind of chalk is that?
What kind of chalk? Well, this is a slate pencil. It's just a piece of slate and it works on other slates. And then when you're through with it, you have a little pad, you don't use my fingers. And then you can do your spelling, you can do your arithmetic, anything. Very, very handy. Any other questions? Well, yes.
What's that thing up there used for?
This?
Yeah.
That's a plane. There's a blade under there. See, it's covered with a piece of cardboard. And you could take a piece of wood and by going over it, smooth it to make a tabletop or something like that. Other kinds, large ones and small ones. Yes.
What's in there?
All of those books, well, they're old school books, most of them, that people have given us. Some of them are quite old, and they're very, very different from the books we have in school today. Yes.
What's that hat up here?
Which one?
It says D's.
It says dunce. Do you know what a dunce is? Don't you? Who knows what a dunce is? Yes, well, we usually think of dunce as being a silly person. Somebody who does something that they know they shouldn't have done. And so when somebody does something like that in a classroom, sometimes the teacher would ask them to do that. And then they would be embarrassed. I'm sure they would. Yes. Oh, no. This is a labor-saving device. People could sit down and work. We need somebody to show us how it works. It's called a shaving horse. So you sit on it like you sit on a horse. That's it. All right, now. Suppose you're going to make a shingle. Because people had to make their own shingles for their houses, and this is one from a very old house here in Mapleshade. You took a piece of cedar. This piece is a piece of wood, it's rather small, but we'll show you how it works. You can sit down to do your work. And by putting this piece of wood under this holder and pushing your foot against the kettle down here. What happens? Hmm? Well, what happens to your piece of wood that you're going to work on? It stays in place, that's exactly right. So then you can take your draw knife and make a shingle, or if you have a piece of wood like this, you can make a chair leg or a table leg. So this was a nice way to work, to be able to sit down and work. Yes? What is what? This? This? Show me. Hold on, show me. Well, that's what I pointed to. Oops. What do you think?
Drill?
What does it drill? You're right. You can see this. That makes it a drill. What does it drill?
Oh.
What kind of a hole? What do you drill holes for when you live out in the country and you don't want your animals to run away? What do you build? A fence. So, you would take this, put it down in the ground, twist it around, make a hole, then you could put your fence post in. Yes.
What's that bell over there?
This?
No, the one next to it on the right.
Here?
Yeah.
Well, that's a meat grinder. See? Put the meat in here. And it has a little grinder in there. That's how you make your hamburger. And this, you could put cherries in this and turn the handle, and the cherries would come out one side and the stones would come out the other side. It's a cherry stone. And this one was an apple parer. You put the apple on here, and somehow or other, this had a blade in it, and you turned it and took the skin out of it. Yes. No, they're not actually rocks. You can see this. They have some writing on. They came from a cemetery that was here in Maple Shade. A very, very old cemetery. Yes.
Aren't these little holes in the end of the desk?
Oh, well, they were for ink wells. When you could use those pens that I showed you for the ink, some of them had a little stopper, and some of them had a top that would come off like this. And you had ink in your desk. Yes. Homemade soap. They had to make their own soap. Another piece of homemade soap.
What's that for?
Well, that's the Maple Shade quilt. And by the ladies of the Maple Shade Women's Club have some of the historic spots in Maple Shade in it. Has a little red schoolhouse, indeed it does. Yes. Who do anywhere?
People like to go to school.
Well, they learn to read, write, spell, and do arithmetic. That's all. With only one teacher and a whole room full of boys and girls, that was just about as much as you could do. Because they had school only a few months in the year. The boys and girls had to work on the plantations. And in the springtime was the planting time, and the fall was harvest time. So they only had school in the colder weather. Question? Okay. Thank you very much for coming.
Don't rush.
Oh, they asked us to come up to the school, up to the head school.
somewhere back to see if there was anything up there we'd like to have. And we have all these extra chairs.
Yeah, and the plaques there too.
Yeah. And I think these little kids.
I went to the school board meeting where they proposed that, and a member of the school board, Mr. Holroyd, he says, I never watch anything on Channel 20, but I did see the Little Red Schoolhouse. And I think we should let the Historical Society go through the Hegg School before we sell it.
Desks and chairs in Manoa. The only reason I got them was because one of the teachers in Moostown didn't like them. They had gotten them for her special class. She didn't like them. And somebody said something about them. I'll take them, I'll take them, I'll take them.
I never saw any old school furniture until I came to Maple Shade. And it was ancient, and the teaching was ancient. We had what they called modern math in Manoa, and when I came here, I couldn't do a division problem. But when we came out of it at the other end, they ended up sending me to